In today's episode, I talk about different notebook bindings, 3D printers and how they can affect the pen business, and a rundown of all of the different Noodler's Ink series names and their properties. It's gonna be good. Hey everybody, Brian Goulet here of GouletPens.com, and it is episode number 156 of Goulet Q&A. It's been an interesting week. Had Valentine's Day this week. That was kind of nice. Got to spend some good quality time with Rachel, so that was really enjoyable. This is our 16th Valentine's Day together, so yeah, it's kind of crazy. So I'm trying to keep it fresh, you know. Let's see what else we had going on. We had the Lamy All-Star Pacific launch last week, which is, if you haven't seen it yet, it's a pretty sweet pen. I didn't grab it out of my little bag yet, but I'll show it right here. I'm a big fan of this pen. Really like it a lot. Actually isn't too far. It's a little bluer than my shirt, but pretty darn close. So if you haven't looked into that yet, we have plenty of them, so I don't think we're going to run out right away or anything like that, so I don't feel pressured, but it's a nice pen, and a lot of people are going to start to get them now and post them online and stuff, so you'll see them kind of more prevalent out there. Good response to them so far, so loving that pen. Some other stuff that we have is the Namiki Yukari Milky Way and Shooting Star, and I have them right here. These are just samples that I have to unfortunately send back, but I would at least show you what's going on. So these are new Namiki Rodin pens that have come out, and I'll show you them in a little bit of detail. These pens are just unbelievable. The detail on these. They are Urushi lacquer pens, which is a very challenging process to do. The artisans train for decades, I am not exaggerating, to learn the techniques used on these pens. And they you know, use all kinds of gold dust, and they do hand painting and stuff like that to get these really cool designs on here. So really, really nice. And I think I said Rodin. I don't know that these are actually, I don't know if these are full-fledged Rodin. That might be a bit of a misnomer. No, it is. The sorry, the gold dust is not Rodin technically, but the moon shapes and stuff are, you know, they use a shell on there. So really cool pens. You can check those out on our site. We have those available now. They just came out from Namiki. They don't release things like every month or anything like that, so it's kind of cool when they come out with new stuff. We have some new Robert Oster inks, a couple new colors, including peppermint, which is kind of hot, a little bit hyped, you know, green with kind of a red sheen to it, so that's kind of cool. We also have the Keras Customs titanium nibs now, which I actually have on here. So if you're not familiar with titanium nibs, they've been talked about for a while. We've been in talks with Keras Customs for at least a year about carrying their titanium nibs. So they're nibs made by Bach. The titanium it's interesting. It's a very soft nib, so it feels more like a gold nib, but it's got a little bit of flexibility to it. The thing about the flexibility, though, is it doesn't stop you quite as easily as gold nibs do. So it's easier a little bit to spring the tines on titanium nibs than it is on gold nibs. They don't give you quite that, like, oh, I think I'm about to spring the tines kind of feeling like the gold nibs do sometimes. It's definitely just like, oh, it's going further, it's going further, it's going to spring, and I sprung the tines. You know, it doesn't give you any response there, so you got to be careful with it. But it's a lot cheaper than a gold nib pen. So those nibs are 60 bucks. You can check those out. Kind of fun to play with in a decent array of nib sizes too. I chose the fine for my personal one because I really like, they're super wet. Those nibs are crazy wet. And I have all the writing samples up in the nib nook. You can see the broad one is just like unfair how wet that thing is. It's really crazy, but they're pretty fun. So you can swap them on your Keras Customs ink. It's the number 6 size nib, so it only fits the ink on the Keras Customs. But you could actually yank the titanium nib out of that and put it on a, you know, whatever you want, Jinhao, something like that. It may not get quite the same flow, but it's certainly hackable, so you can give that a shot. Also, just got in some Tomoe River A5 loose sheets. So a lot of you I know who preferred the A5 size were buying the tablets full size and then cutting them down, but now you don't have to do that anymore. So we have A5 sheets. So that's pretty cool. We have it both white and cream, and we just got those in, so you can check those out. And then the last thing, as far as new products go that I have to talk about, that I actually have on our store right now, is the Leuchtturm B5 soft covers. So this is a kind of an interesting size. It's not a super common size for most notebooks, but a lot of people like it, especially in the bullet journaling community. Seems to be pretty good. It's a little bit larger than an A5, not quite as big as an A4. It's soft cover, so you can like roll it up and you can keep it in your backpack or something like that if you prefer to do more of the roll up method. So it's kind of neat. And we got 3 colors, gray, pink, turquoise. So kind of fun. You can check those out. And they are dot grid as well. That's what we're carrying. I think it's just dots, yeah. So kind of neat. So got some new stuff, some new paper. Cool, it's nice to keep it fresh a little bit. I know we went through kind of a dry spell with not a lot of new products, and that is over because we got all kinds of new stuff coming in now. It's getting a little intense. Some of the new things that you'll see on our site now, the Stipula Passaporto is being revived. It was, you know, popular a few years ago. It's a little, I don't have one physically to show you here, but it's a little, you know, pocket pen, and that's being revived, lower price than it used to be as well. So it's eyedropper only pen, but it's great for a little carry around thing. So that's kind of cool. Conklin has a small pen called the Mini Graph that's about the size of a Quaco. So that is up on our site too. It's very, very tiny. And then on the flip side of that, we have Monteverde has a pen called the Giant Sequoia, which is a huge pen. So that with some interesting materials in there. So that will be out soon as well. Monteverde has several new inks that have come out as well. So I know we just had a bunch of new Monteverde inks that came out. We have like 8 or 10 more that just came out again. So Monteverde's pushing like 40 different new ink colors. So that's pretty cool. So Monteverde's mixing it up, and they're pretty solid colors too. I mean, like solid as in, not like the ink is solid, that would be bad, but solid as in like, you know, nice colors that are kind of unique and you know, bright and vibrant and stuff like that. So it's gonna be pretty cool. And then we have the Platinum Nice Lilas. Lila, I don't know exactly how to say it, just being honest with you here, but however you say it, the pen looks beautiful. It's a pink demonstrator with rose gold trim. I think it's gonna look really good. I don't have one yet, I haven't seen it in person, but I know I'm gonna snag one of those for myself. It's not a limited edition pen. We actually had that on our website for a little bit that we were mistaken. We thought it was limited edition. It's not. They're doing limited number for the first 2,000. So they're numbering the first 2,000 of them, but after that, it's gonna be a regularly available pen. So we had a little miscommunication on that. Sorry about that. We haven't sold any pens yet, so it's not a problem, but you know, just in case you were thinking, oh my gosh, I better snatch this up right away. If you want one with a number, yes, you need to move quickly, but beyond that, the pen will still be available. It's a little more expensive of a pen, but it's going to cost more up in the range of what their limited editions have cost in the past, but this is going to be a regularly available pen. And then the Pelikan Edelstein Ink of the Year has been announced. It's smoky quartz, so kind of like a taupe color, I think. I don't know, I haven't seen it in person yet, but you know, it should be interesting. It was the runner-up from when they did a couple of years ago when they did the, or maybe it was last year, did the voting thing where you got to submit your own ideas for colors. The winner was the amethyst, and then the runner-up was the smoky quartz. So they chose to do it this year. That should be coming somewhat soon, I think March-ish. And then the Traveler's Notebook Special Edition has been announced for this year in an olive color. So kind of interesting. So that's up on our site. And then the TWSBI is coming out with a TWSBI AL or TWSBI All, so the aluminum component version of the Mini. So they've done the AL in the 580, but then they're doing one in the Mini now. And the blue apparently is reformulated. It's a little more vibrant than it has been when it's in the 580. So I haven't seen that in person yet either. And then TWSBI is also coming out with the VAC 700R, which is very similar to the VAC 700, except it's been tweaked a little bit. I talked about that more last week, but that should be coming out soon as well. And last but not least, we have the Visconti Brunelleschi, which is the one that I showed last week as well. That is the terracotta pen. So lots to get excited about here. And that's going to be coming towards the end of this month, maybe early February, depending if things get delayed. So whew, that is a lot of stuff that is coming. And there's more that I know about that I'm not yet ready to talk about because we either don't have it on the site or have no pictures or information really. But there's more. There's more coming, so get ready. It's going to be an exciting spring. All right, let's get into it this week, shall we? Got some solid questions this week. Been getting a lot of good questions from you guys, so I'm going to keep them coming. All right, first one is, I only have one pen writing related question this week. It's interesting. So this is from Vince Vince Bentfield on YouTube. Will Goulet ever make a Goulet Flex nib or make a gold nib? Make a gold Goulet nib, not gold plated, but like an actual gold nib. So this is kind of two different things. The first one I will say is just the regular gold nib. We could do that anytime. We really could, because Jovo is our nib manufacturer. Jovo is a very popular German nib manufacturer that you may know if you know Edison pens. They supply Edison with Jovo nibs as well. And we actually sell Edison 18 karat gold nibs. You can put them on, a lot of Goulet pens. It's a number 6 nib, just like our Goulet nibs are. So you can actually put this on all the same things. So it just has the Edison logo on it. So for us, it's like, okay, should we carry our own 18 karat nib with the Goulet logo on it in addition to the Edison ones? We sell some Edison gold nibs, not a ton, and honestly, when it comes to doing the engraving and all that kind of stuff, the minimums, it's a bit of an investment. You know, the steel nibs is one thing, but the gold nibs, it's expensive. You know, we'd end up charging around the same price as we do for the Edison one, so it's $125 for just the nib unit, and that's, that's fine. Like, it costs what it costs, but it's steep, you know what I mean? Like, you can almost buy a whole other pen, like a whole other gold nib pen for that price almost. Something like a Lamy 2000 or a Vanishing Point. So it gets kind of pricey. So it's because we already have that Edison nib option, it's just not quite as obvious to us. It's not like it's such an easy, obvious opportunity for us. Yes, it would seem kind of cool to have another nib with our logo on it, but it's going to be a very similar nib. So I don't know, maybe, I'm not going to say that it's not a possibility, because we could do it relatively easily. It's just an investment on our part. We just it hasn't been so obvious to us that we did that. So the other part of it is the flex nib. The flex nib's a little more complicated. There are a lot more manufacturers that are coming out with flex nibs now, and that's really kind of cool. I've seen, obviously Noodler's has it. You have soft nibs that I've seen in Pilot. I've seen them in Sailor and Platinum. A lot of the Japanese companies, Omos had a flexible nib back in when they were around. Aurora is now coming out with a flex nib, which I will say I just got to test one like a couple hours ago. Pretty legit, I gotta say. So that's kind of new. They're actually just kind of announcing that this week. And then they, who else has got one? Stipula is kind of reviving the flex nib as well. They've got kind of a cool story. They found some old school nib manufacturing equipment from the 50s that was in this guy's basement in Italy, and they found the equipment and been refurbishing it the last couple of years, and so now they're making old school vintage flex nibs. So that's kind of cool. So there's definitely flex nibs that are starting to come about, but I can say from talking to people in the pen industry, when it comes to manufacturing these flex nibs, it's hard. Especially if you're talking about the 14 karat gold nibs with the added flex and stuff like that. It gets very difficult because of the amount of expertise and labor that's involved. So I know actually Edison has worked with Richard Binder. I know not available through retailers like us, because just the economics don't work out, and the economy of scale is just not there. But I know that Edison directly has sold signature line pens with nibs that have had flex added from Richard Binder, and like Spencerian flex nibs that have been pretty legit. I've seen one of those in person before, and it's pretty astounding how they work, but it's expensive. You know what I mean? The labor that's involved in doing that. First off, you have to buy a gold nib anyway, so it's $125 right there, and then you have to pay for the additional labor on top of that, which is probably somewhere in the $40 to $80 range, depending on the nibmeister and who's kind of doing it. So you're talking right off the bat $150 to $200 just for the nib to get a gold flex nib without it, and then it's whew, that gets pretty pricey. So right out the gate, it kind of prices it out of most people's range, and then just having someone with the expertise to be able to do them is kind of challenging. So I don't know how, I'm not going to say it's not possible that we couldn't add one in the future. It's just because it's so kind of piecing all these different parts together and then having to jump through a lot of hoops and having it be pretty expensive to offer it. it's just not going to be as straightforward as you would probably hope for us to be able to offer something like that regularly. But is it something longer term that we could look to develop more? Yeah, probably. It's just not going to be immediate. So I'm excited about the opportunity of maybe getting there someday, but this is not anything that we're going to have, practically speaking, in 2017 probably. All right, next question I have. This is an ink question from Robert on YouTube. What is the difference between Diamine Steel Blue and Diamine Marine? I've looked at your swab shop and they look almost identical. Why would a manufacturer make two inks that are so similar? Okay, fair enough. And I'll go ahead and throw another one in the mix too. Diamine Eau de Nil is pretty close as well. At least it looks that way on our swab shop online. The thing that I'll say, Diamine Marine is one of my favorite inks. So I gotta kind of lay it out right there. I have it actually inked up in my daily carry pen right now. I also have it inked up in the pen that I have right over here on my desk. I love that ink. If I were to replace that with Steel Blue, I probably wouldn't really notice all that much. You know what I mean? Like the properties are not so drastically different. They both shade well, all that kind of stuff. So I had the actual physical swabs between Steel Blue and Marine. And the thing that I want to say about whenever you're looking at swabs, like we do our absolute best to color correct everything in the swab shop and make it as color accurate as possible. The thing that we can't ever adjust for is what your monitor looks like and how it actually displays stuff. So obviously, depending on what kind of monitor you're looking at, how color corrected it is and stuff like that, your colors may look completely different than what we've actually scanned in. We try to do what we can for that, but that's just a fact that we can't do, that we can't really adjust for. Not to mention the fact that certain colors will look different to people's eyes, even if it's displayed the exact same way. So, and some people, especially when you get into like this greenish, bluish kind of range, it can be even difficult for some people to distinguish some colors from others. And like men and women see colors differently even in certain color ranges. Like I know greens can be in there and purples and grays and stuff like that. So the thing I'll say about this is that when it comes to digitally displaying colors, it's physically impossible, at least with the kind of monitors we have in current technology, to digitally display as many colors as you can see in real life. So you actually can't see a lot of the subtleties of what the color will look like in real life. That's why we sell samples. That's why we're always saying, okay, use the swab shop to kind of hone in on it. And then if you want, get both samples and see which one you like more and then buy a full bottle. Because that's kind of what you do. Just like you get paint swatches and you get, you know, 5 that seem like the right color, but you got to put it on the wall and see what it looks like in the light and all that. You got to try the sample. You got to get the swab shot. You got to put it in your light with your eyes and your pen and see how it writes. So samples, I'm always plugging samples. But between Steel Blue and Marine, there is a subtle difference between the two. So I find the Steel Blue to be just a little bit greener. Marine is just a little bit bluer. And I think that Marine in general is not quite as deeply saturated as Steel Blue, though this swab, it actually looks just a little bit more saturated, but go figure. So the biggest thing is that the Steel Blue is a little greener. But it is very close, I'll give you that. And then honestly in the swab shop, I looked at Eau de Nil and thought it was really kind of a close match, but I'm seeing it's actually much bluer. Much being a subjective term, but so there's that in there as well. So yes, a lot of these do end up being very subtle. We offer some, I don't know exactly the number at this point, but about 600 colors of fountain pen ink, and yeah, probably over 600 now with Robert Oster and everything. We've gotten a lot of new stuff. So it's you're going to get some colors that look pretty darn close. Now, usually if you're seeing stuff that's like black ink, right? Like how many black inks do you need? And you would expect that every ink maker would have a black ink, right? But why would have one company like Noodler's, for example, have like 10 different black inks? What's the difference? Or in this case, you're talking about Marine and Steel Blue. Why is Diamine offering 2 blues that are so similar? Shouldn't they just like cancel one and go with the other? Well, yeah, that could work. That, you know, would make sense. I don't know the inner workings of Diamine all that well. You know, we have a distributor, US distributor that we buy Diamine through, and I don't have like direct contact with anybody who actually manufactures the ink at Diamine, so I don't have any good answers about how they make it or anything like that. But I can say, since we've been retailing Diamine the last 6 years or so, I don't know that they've ever discontinued a color. Like, I think they were carrying somewhere in the neighborhood of 70-ish or slightly above 70, closer to 80 colors when we first started carrying them. And now they're well above that. They've come out with the flower series, the music series. They've added a whole bunch of things to their line. They came out with all the shimmering inks. I mean, they've really almost, not quite, but almost doubled the number. No, and they haven't really even doubled. Well, I don't know. They've come out with a lot of new ink colors in the last, 5-6 years, but they really haven't discontinued much. So a lot of the colors they've come out with have been sometimes similar to something they already had. I'm sure at some point, if they just like never sold any of something, that it would make more sense to discontinue it, but they really haven't. So they must be doing okay enough. I'm sure, as business people, if they already have a color and they come out with a new color that's slightly different and both sell really well, why would they discontinue? But yeah, sure, it can look a little confusing when you're out there in the marketplace shopping for different colors. So, they're definitely not the only brand that does that. Noodler's has a lot of similar colors, lots of blues, lots of blacks and things like that are pretty similar. Any boutique ink company, especially when it gets to like the 50 to 100 colors or more, you're gonna get some overlap on some of those. There's no way you can have 100 different colors and you not end up with a few that are close enough to where you could argue, why do they offer both? So, sometimes the color is really similar, but maybe the naming or the theming or the bottle or something like that could be a little bit different too. There's things like that. But it's like, really, how many blacks, how many blue blacks, how many royal blues and all that do you really need? Well, why are there so many paint colors? You know what I mean? It's like everybody's got a different preference. People see colors in different ways. To one person, this color might look completely identical. To somebody else, you might be like, oh, I can tell a huge difference. There's no way I could use steel blue, but marine is my favorite color. Some people, you might be surprised. Some people, that's the case though. I mean, I'm not joking. We get some people that buy like 20 different ink samples of a very similar hue and hate one, hate one, hate one, hate one, hate one, love the other one. They're like, this is the color I've been looking for. Great. More power to you. That's why we have our process. That's why we have the swab shop. That's why we have the samples. And then you're not just buying bottles left and right, getting stuck with something that's just missing the mark a little bit. But yeah, that's my insight there. All right, this next question is an absolute doozy. And I'm gonna have to talk to Jenny about this one in post-production here, because she normally tries to put up the swabs, the bottle and swab pictures when I talk about ink, but I've got a lot to talk about here, so I'll talk to her about how to plan that out. Anyway, so this question is from bulletjournalingintheboot on Instagram. What is the difference and special properties of the Noodler's lines? Australian Roses, Bad, Baystate, Eel, etc., etc. Okay, so first thing I want to point you to is we have a Noodler's ink property spreadsheet, which I think is going to help you a lot for understanding the special properties and what they mean, the various definitions. So I have, the terms, and these terms are all Noodler's specific terms. So I'll explain those to you right now. First one is bulletproof, which is, the most catchy and kind of interesting, and it's so commonplace in my own vernacular right now that I'm like, oh yeah, bulletproof, whatever. But I remember when I was first getting into fountain pens, I was like, bulletproof? Does that mean you can like shoot the glass and it won't break or something? It's like, what does that even mean? It just means like it's very, strong, I guess. So it's UV resistant, bleach resistant. It's meant to be really kind of tamper resistant, right? That's the whole point of it, is that you put it down and it will not go away. So that's a very Noodler specific term there. Nobody else calls their stuff bulletproof. The next term is eternal. And the terms between bulletproof and eternal, it's like, well, what's the difference? Well, eternal is really just more archival fade resistant. So it's not so much forgery proof, but it's more that it's going to hold up kind of naturally over time and not fade as much. So you can have a lot of inks that are bulletproof and eternal, but you can have some that are eternal but not bulletproof. Does that make sense? The next one you have is forgery resistant, which does kind of fall a lot into bulletproof and overlaps a bit, but there's a couple that are forgery resistant without being bulletproof. I understand that's confusing. That's probably the most confusing between the two, but it's impervious to alcohols, solvents, and all that. But I think what's the distinguishing characteristic between the forgery resistant ones is Nathan Tardif, the guy who makes the ink, he actually formulates them and mixes slightly different amounts of some of the dye components. The way he explains it is it's kind of like a combination lock. So if you ever needed to trace back a specific ink to the bottle that was used, or at least the batch that was used, you would be able to do that if you were using one of those forgery-resistant inks. The next one is water resistant. So this is just partially or fully waterproof, not necessarily forgery resistant like you might be able to bleach wash it, but just kind of in normal writing, it's not going to wash away quite as easily with water. Next one is fluorescent. So this actually glows under UV black light. So it has some sort of UV reflective component to it. Then you have lubricated, which is when you add additional lubricants, and really it's made for piston filling mechanisms so that you don't have to lubricate them as much. It kind of keeps the piston lubricated as you're using the pen. And then the last one is freeze resistant. So these are inks that are made to go below, ink is mostly made of water. So if you get, well below freezing, the ink can actually freeze inside the pen, but these are made to resist that and still write and flow well, even at very far below freezing temperatures, like -20 degrees Fahrenheit and maybe even below. So that kind of explains some of the terminology, and now I'll get into some of the series names, which some of the series names are not super obvious, or we don't like. What's challenging about this is we have a good faceted search feature on our site, but we can't really put some of these Noodler specific terms in there, because then only Noodler's inks would show up, and it would be kind of confusing for other brands and stuff like that, because the other brands may still have some of the same properties but not be called those, so they wouldn't fall under. So it's a little confusing there in terms of how we structured on the site, I admit. And then there's some that it's like it falls under a certain series of ink from Noodler's, but it's not obvious that it is that way. So that's what this video is to help you with at least a little bit here. So the first one I'm going to start out with is the Warden series, or the Bad series. So this is Bad Blue Heron, Bad Black Moccasin, Bad Green Gator, and Bad Belted Kingfisher. So these are, the forgery resistant ones. They are laser proof. So the story behind these inks is that back in the early 2000s, Nathan had Noodler's Black, and he said, this thing is impervious, and if anybody can remove this ink from paper, I will give you $1,000. I think it was $1,000 or something like that, and said, I'll give you $1,000 and I'll then develop something that you can't remove. So some grad student from MIT used some kind of specific laser and removed the ink from the paper using this laser. So Nathan specifically formulated ink that could not be removed by laser. And that is where the Bad series of inks came from. Voila. Next series we have is Baystate. So these are very vibrant, they're more alkaline, and they're not compatible with other inks. If you mix them, they will turn into a gel and kind of foam up, and it will not play nicely. So you do not want to mix these with anything. You can mix them with themselves, the Baystates, but not the other ones. So that includes Baystate Blue, Cape Cod Cranberry, and Concord Grape. So very vibrant, but don't mix them with others. Next one is the kind of the UK, the Russian, or like other countries series. So Nathan has developed a lot of inks specific to certain regions or countries or things like that. It's not just the Russian UKs, there's been a lot of different countries he's developed them for various reasons, and he usually heavily themes them around whatever's going on in that area, often politically natured, but sometimes, dealing with arts or music or something like that. But so there's a lot that I'm going to kind of not mention as much. He's on Canadian, he's on all these other things. But the ones that we actually have on our site is some Russian and UK inks. So inks like Empire Red, L. Lawrence, Matahari's Cordial, Dostoevsky. We've had Rachmaninoff. We don't have any more, but we used to have it. And so things like that that are either are made for a specific country and that's it, and they never are made again, or they have been made for a specific country. These ones I listed here used to be made for either UK or Russia, got discontinued a long time ago. Nathan wanted to bring them back, so we brought them back just kind of in the US in a limited capacity. So for these inks, the properties can vary all over the place, but for the Russian UK ones, most of them are eternal and UV fluorescent in some capacity, and then there's usually that heavy theming component as well. Next one we have is the Eternal series. So it's a little confusing because there's Eternal in terms of the actual component itself. which is more of a property, but there's actually an eternal series, which is the way to easily distinguish it is it's the ones that come in the Noodler's 1 ounce bottles. So most everything comes in a 3 ounce or maybe a 4.5, but the 1 ounce bottles, which include Hunter Green, Fox Red, Periwinkle, Luxury Blue, Whiteness of the Whale. I think that's all of them. I might be missing one, but they are all the eternal ones. So they're going to have the archival, fade resistant properties, and more than likely be generally waterproof as well on those. So that's what's up with those. And the reason they're in 1 ounce bottles is because the chemicals needed for them are very expensive. So Nathan put them in smaller bottles so that you wouldn't have a $30 3 ounce bottle. He was able to charge less. Next, we have a highlighter series. I don't know if that's officially a series name, but it's a highlighter inks. That's kind of their own category. The Dragon Cat series would be one that's considered, but I don't even know that they're still there. They might be on the outs anyway. But there's the Dragon Cat Pink, Green, and Orange that have been around for years. Hellfire, Georgia Peach, Summer Tanager, St. Patty's Ire, Firefly, which is I think the best of all of them. A lot of different highlighter inks there. That really don't fall into their own series, but that's the main component of those there. The next one is the American Eel series. It's called the Eel, American Eel. I'm not sure exactly which is the proper term, but it's called American Eel on some of them. They are the ones that are lubricated. So the lubricated is the Eel series. If you think eels are slippery, whatever, lubricated, that kind of makes sense, right? So most of these are lubricated versions of existing colors. For example, there's Noodler's Black, and then there's Black Eel. There's Noodler's Blue and Blue Eel. So there's several different ones where they're similar properties, just lubricated. There's a couple, Green Cactus and Green Cactus Eel. There's a couple that aren't fall in that group, like Cactus Fruit Eel. There's no just regular cactus fruit. And then Noodler's Purple Heart, which is one of our exclusives, is actually a purple lubricated ink, but it's not called Eel because Purple Heart Eel just sounded really strange, so we chose to just call it Purple Heart. But that falls into that group too. So again, those are the ones that you can use in piston filling pens. You can use it in any pen. They write wetter, so if you want your pen to write wetter, you use an Eel ink, and that can be really good there. The next one is the Polar series, so that is freeze resistant, and also I believe most if not all of them are lubricated and bulletproof as well, but the freeze resistant component is what makes them polar. So Polar Blue, Black, Brown, Green, those are all part of the Polar series, and they really work too. They'll feather a little bit more on most papers than others, but they will resist freezing for sure. All right, this next one is called the V-Mail series. So this is one that's not nearly as obvious, but they fall into their own series. So they are World War II themed, and they were reverse engineered to match inks that came from that era. So Nathan did some kind of chemical wizardry and actually formulated stuff that was nearly identical matches to inks that he was able to acquire from that time. So this, and most of these inks have some sort of B-2 bombers or something like that on the bottle that that look not a B-2, maybe not a B-2 bomber, I don't know. I don't know my plane terminology that well, but planes on it from that era. So this would include Air Corps Blue Black, Burma Road Brown, GI Green, North African Violet, Midway Blue, Operation Overload Orange. So all of those are part of that V-Mail series. Next one is I guess I'll call it the Fast Dry series. It was previously known as the Bernanke inks, which it still kind of is, but you had Bernanke Blue and Black. Those are fast drying inks. So they are meant to dry quickly on the page. Doesn't mean they'll dry fast in your pen. It means they'll dry fast when they get on the paper. And they do that by absorbing into the paper and kind of spreading out. So they write a little wetter, or they seem to write wetter. It's weird because they're fast drying inks, but they actually write really wet because of how they absorb into the page. It's so that it's really made for lefties, so that if you're smearing your hand across the page quickly after you've written, you're not going to get ink all over your hand. Okay. And then QOTW would be the blue-black color that fits in there. It's not called a Bernanke ink, but it's within that same series, same properties. And then the last one that I kind of have is like the Blue Erase Black Erase. It doesn't really have a name for the series. It's only 2 inks, but they're whiteboard inks. So they're wet writing whiteboard inks. You put them into like a highlighter tip, you know, Preppy or something like that, and you can use it on a dry erase board. So it works pretty well. And then there's all kinds of other ones that don't fall into a specific category, but they are very unique properties, like Kung To Cheng, Whaleman Sepia, Blue Ghost, Rome Burning, the Australian Roses ones. The Australian Roses, those are kind of more designed to be used for flex pens. They kind of fall in the, you know, there's not like really a flex pen series, but the Black Swan and the English Roses ones, sorry, Black Swan Australian Roses, Black Swan and English Roses, and then Blue Nose Bear actually was kind of developed to be similar to that as well, is meant to be really dramatic and shade really nicely and have a lot of color variation when used in a flex pen. That's kind of what it's there for. And then Dark Matter is just an example of an ink that's kind of neat, you know, it's like it's another one, kind of like the V-Mail ones where it was developed to mimic ink that was used for the Manhattan Project. So, you know, just unique components like that. And there's all kinds of heavy theming around a lot of the different Noodler's inks. And there's ones with varying properties kind of all over the place. That's where that spreadsheet really helps a ton, as you can see all the different properties that are used on those. But I think that pretty much hits on all the major series that you have there. Hopefully that clears it up a little bit, but I know that's a lot of information there, and believe me, it's taken a long time to make any sense of how all that is unfolded in the last, you know, 15 years or so since Nathan's been making ink. And the last thing I just kind of want to leave off with that is, if you're looking at that properties chart, you're going to notice that there's some where it's like, okay, different inks will be in a series and it'll have some components, but maybe not others, and certain things like that. And then there's some that say partially. The ones that are partially, what it means is that there's multiple dye components that are mixed in there, and one of them, I'll use Black Swan Australian Roses as an example, is the maroon component to the ink is not bulletproof and it'll wash away with water, and the black component is, so the black will stay behind. So the ink, he calls it partially because one component of the ink will stay, but the ink in its natural original color won't. You know, our color Liberty's Elysium is the same way. You know, the more vibrant component of the blue will wash away, but the darker, more permanent component of the blue will stay there. So it kind of washes away a little bit, but it kind of also stays there for basically forever. So you get into some things like that, so we put it as partially. All right. Whew. I think that was the big one, but I got some other. Oh man, this is a really meaty Q&A. All right, next question I have. This is from Samael238 on YouTube. I'd like to draw something with a fountain pen and give it as a gift to someone. Is there something that I can use on the drawing to protect it from UV exposure? I feel that if it gets framed and puts inside a room with the windows, it's going to fade. Is there a spray or a transparent sheet of something that will absorb or reflect the UV rays, or is there anything else I can do? So I talked a little bit about UV stuff and the previous Q&As and stuff like that. A couple of things that I think would help. The first one, this is very pertinent, like why I didn't put this one before the Noodler's question, because I wanted you to have context about some of the different properties. So there's definitely some inks you can get, such as some of the Noodler's Eternals, that are UV resistant. Now, the thing I will say about dye-based fountain pen inks is they are not an like archival, like what's it called? There's like a name for it for when you're working with art, of having just like, when they do testing for different like art acrylics and stuff like that for paintings, they have to like have a certain degree of fade resistance over a 50-year period or something like that to classify as whatever, art worthy. I don't know the term. Should have looked it up ahead of time. Sorry about that. I do not have an art degree or anything like that, so I'm a little unstudied in this way. But I know that when you're looking at actually like displaying art, it's there's some mediums that are better than others, you know, and certainly a pigmented medium like acrylic paint is better than a dye-based medium like fountain pen ink. Think about like the US Constitution or the Declaration of Independence or something like that that's on display. Well, it's like super faded already, only after a couple hundred years, and it's like placed under like super thick UV, like impermeable glass, right? Because it fades worse than a lot of other mediums. So I would say if it's something like super valuable and meaningful, you should really try to work in a different medium, like maybe using a dip pen with calligraphy-based ink that has pigment in it instead. Now you can get a couple of pigmented fountain pen inks, and those would be better than dye-based inks. And then, you know, like platinum carbon black is an example, platinum pigmented blue. There's not a lot of these. Sailor has a couple. Certainly you could go with something that's a little more permanent, like the Diatramentis document inks or a bunch of the Noodlers that have eternal or bulletproof inks would be better than conventional fountain pen inks. But either way, just understand that it is going to break down over time. So if you are some sort of accomplished artist, or you aspire to be, and you want your work to be saved as long as humanly possible, that's not really the right medium for it. But if you're just drawing a picture for your mom, and you know she's going to display it for the next 20 years, and then it's going to get shoved in a box and never see the light of day again, okay, you could probably pretty much use whatever, and it wouldn't really matter too much. As far as like transparent sprays or films or anything like that, I don't know of anything that's good to do that, other than you can get like UV filtering glass for displaying, you know, pictures and artwork and stuff like that. So getting a frame with that UV glass would probably be good. That would keep it from resisting too much. Yeah, you're gonna have to use your judgment on that one. And that's really the best that I have as far as using that. So my best recommendation would be find another medium if it's really that important. Otherwise, just do the best you can. All right. Whew, man, I'm really piling on thick on myself today. All right, I got a paper question here. It's a good paper question. It's just deep. So Kevin G on Facebook asks, a question on paper, since paper is more exciting to me than ink or pen. Fair enough. What are your thoughts on different notebook bindings and their pros and cons? Okay, so I've used a lot of different ones, but not all of them. I'll show you some of my personal preferences. This is just my personal preferences, maybe with some pros and cons, and a lot of it's based on stuff that I sell because those are the binding types that I'm most familiar with. I haven't used a lot of really radical different bindings than what I have here, but there certainly could be some out there, so it's not the most exhaustive resource, but it will hopefully at least give you something to think about. First one I have is staple bound. So you can get top staple bound, side staple bound. This would include something like a, you know, Rhodia pad where it's like staple bound and it's really meant to be torn off, like to-do list style. That's usually more what you're going to see in a top staple bound. In a side staple bound, you can get something like this Field Notes here, which I pulled out the snow blind because I wanted to go a little deep for you all who are avid fans, and now I'm having a difficult time getting it out of the sleeve. I hang on to like every Field Notes edition that comes out. This is the one that will actually, oh my gosh, it's like sticking to itself. Oh no, please don't be a problem. Okay, there we go, we're good. It's a little nerve-wracking there. I was like, is this thing gonna come apart? So this is the one that like turns blue when you get it out into the sun. It's pretty cool, but it's a staple bound, so it has the staples that are stapled right through. It's just one signature of paper in the middle, stapled in the middle. So the pros for staple bound notebooks in general is it's usually pretty economical because it's not a very elaborate binding type, so usually you get more bang for the buck for the paper. It's more versatile because you can, you know, do it in a lot of different configurations here. You can get different sizes, you can get really small, you can get really big. And the, you know, the way that you use it, I find it to be pretty versatile. Like you can get it really thin and you can keep it in your pocket. That's kind of what I mean by versatile. Usually it's pretty flexible. Like the covers and stuff that you're going to have with staple bounds are going to be much more flexible. So it's for me, it's a little more comfortable for carrying around. I carry something like this around in my pocket all the time, and it's not very obtrusive. It just kind of feels like an extension of like my wallet maybe. A little more practical than carrying around like a hardcover notebook, right? In terms of that. Cons would be that, well, being more flexible, it's slightly less durable. You could argue it's can be, for the top bound ones, you really can't use the back very easily. So you can use the front of the page, but then when it comes to the back, you know, you can like flip it over and kind of use part of the back, or you can tear it off and use the back, but then it's really kind of meant to be tossed a little bit more. So that's a, you know, a con for some folks. And then you can only get but so thick with it. You know, when you do the top staple bound like this and it's just a staple going straight through, you can get it fairly thick. But especially the little notebooks, because the ones that are wrapped over and then stapled through the side, you can really only get but so thick, because otherwise those staples aren't going to hold very well. So that's kind of a drawback as well. They're generally going to be thinner notebooks. Or maybe that's a plus for you, I don't know. Next one I wanted to talk about was wire bounds. Wire bounds are a really preferential thing. Wire bounds, kind of like staple bounds, are a more economical form of binding, so you can get a little more bang for your buck with your paper if you're getting wire bound notebooks. Think about like those Mead, like, you know, 5-star notebooks that you had, like the single subject notebooks where, you know, it was wire bound and whatnot. You can get those in a top wire bound, you know, reporter style, or a side wire bound, just like you can do with the staple bound ones. The better quality paper is usually going to have the double wire ring, because they're a little more durable. So pros is that it's economical. The sheets can be easily removed. If they're not micro perforated already, you can do the thing where you just rip out, you know, the sheet, and usually get the little dangly things that come on there, but you just kind of tear those off. It's not a huge deal, but you can remove those sheets. A lot more difficult to do that in a bound journal like that, unless it has perforated pages. It's really easy to use both sides. It lays really flat as well, so I like that a lot. The cons is that the binding is thicker than the notebook. Even when it's closed, it's going to be thicker. That kind of is inevitable. And then when you have it in the middle and you're trying to write on the opposite side, you know, if you're writing on the left page, you know, the binding can feel weird on your right hand, or the right hand on the other side. So that might annoy you. That's probably the #1 reason I hear that people don't like the wire bounds, is they don't like the way that their hand feels on it when they're trying to write on the opposite side page. You know, and then these double wire bound ones really do hold up pretty well, but certainly even they are subject to getting bent or damaged and making it harder, and then your paper could like come off, and it could just be, excuse me, just be a little bit frustrating. So you got to take that into account. And then just maybe somewhat less durable. Like, they're usually not thick covers, they're the flimsy covers, kind of like the staple bound ones. So it's something to think about there. Next one I have is glued binding. So this I'm really referring to like a stationary tablet, like the Clairefontaine Triomphe, or like the Tomoe River, or G. Lalo, or Crown Mill. You know, it's just got a glued binding at the top. So it's really meant to be where you write something and then you tear off a sheet like that. So it's really easy to tear off. I'm going to save that paper because I just tore off a fresh, clean sheet. Yeah, that's kind of what the glue binding is all about. So the advantages of that one would be, you know, it's obviously very easy to tear it off for things like stationery. It gives a nice clean edge as opposed to like a wire bound or something like that. The disadvantage of it is it's really not meant to be carried around. Like, you can slide this inside a backpack or something, but you're not going to carry a Triomphe pad and take notes on it and stuff like that. The top staple bound is going to be a little better for that than this. Well, this is really meant to be like used, you tear off a sheet and then you mail it kind of thing. So that's taken into account. Next one I have is stitched, which this gets a little confusing because you get stitch binding and then you can combine this with a lot of other things that I'm talking about here. So I'm going to talk about stitched more as a component of it. You really generally don't have stitched as kind of its own classification. You know, for example, I have this old school Clairefontaine Basic, which I think they've actually changed the bindings on these now to be just glued and not stitched and glued. But in some versions of the notebooks, well, let me see if I can pull out one that I do actually carry now, like a Leuchtturm, for example. This is a Leuchtturm bullet journal, and if I open it up, the way that you can tell that it's stitched is you can see when you're looking at the binding that there's like these little, you know, kind of groupings. They're called signatures, and you can see where they are. And in the middle of each signature is a stitching, and I'm going to try to get to the middle of it so I can maybe show you where it is. You can see there's like little, you know, every 3/4 of an inch or so. There it is. Okay, so I'm in the middle of a signature now, and I'm going to see if I can show you where. Yeah, you can see them. Like, there's a thread, there's a thread, there's a thread, there's a thread, there's a thread. So that's stitching. So that is going to be a little more durable. So it's going to hold in better. And the nice thing about this is you can group a whole bunch of these signatures together, and you can make a thicker notebook than you can in just a regular staple bound. What did I do? Oh, than just like a regular staple bound. Like this, granted there's 3 of them in one pack, but that's about as thick as you can get with this. You can go a little bit thicker, but it becomes more unstable the more you try to staple through. But this one I can group a whole bunch of signatures together and I can get a much thicker notebook. So that is the advantage of having it stitched, added durability. The disadvantage of having stitched pages is that depending on how it's done, it can be more difficult for it to lay flat. Because you're dealing with a thicker notebook generally. It also increases your cost. So you're pretty much always going to pay more for like a bound journal that has a stitch group like this than you would a staple bound or wire bound. Kind of the same thing with cloth bound. So I have, you know, this is a stitched and glued cloth bound. This is an old version of it. I believe Clairefontaine now, I should go back and look these days, but our website should be accurate. I'm getting like cloudy because we've been carrying these for so many years. I'm like, do they still do it? I remember they changed over the classic ones, but not the basic. So I need to refresh myself a little bit, but either way, you get the concept is that you get that kind of stitched and glued binding, but then it has this cloth edge, which kind of reinforces. So it's a flimsier cover, you know, it's a cardboard cover. It's not a hard cover like this Leuchtturm here. And in order to reinforce the binding, you can have a cloth wrapping on it. You can also have, like, for example, on the Apica Premium has it as well. It's not quite a cloth, it's literally like more of a tape reinforced. But this one is, I believe this is, yeah, this is stitched and glued as well, I can tell. And it also has kind of that reinforced binding because it's got the flimsy cover. So that's just another way that it's done. You know, the advantages of that is it's fairly economical, a little more economical, especially on the cover side, than a hardcover journal like this. So a little economical, not quite as durable. You see where the trade-off is clearly showing up on all of these things. And then the last one, second to last one, I have is the hardcover, like this Leuchtturm here, Rhodia Web Notebook, Quabata Sabana, all these sorts of things have a hardcover. And usually you'll see stitched and glued bindings in these because maximum durability and longevity is key, because these things are going to get abused and taken around and traveled with. And so that's the advantage, is they're usually pretty durable. You usually get some kind of bookmarker that goes with it, maybe a back pocket to it as well, an elastic strap. You're usually getting some additional features. There's your back pocket, so you can put stuff in it. So the added durability really adds to the functionality of it. The disadvantage would be cost. Cost goes up. So you're paying more in the $20 to $25 neighborhood for something like this, whereas a Rhodia pad like this is, you know, $5.50. So you're going up and up and up in cost depending on the durability and how long you want it to last. And then the last thing, which isn't really a binding type, but I just included it anyway, is loose sheets. It's pretty obvious. Loose sheets are probably the most economical because there's no additional binding you're paying for. But the disadvantage is that you can't really carry them anywhere unless they're like in a packaging of some kind or something else. So again, continues with the theme of trade-off for durability, versatility with cost. And that pretty much explains my take on different paper rulings. My preference is that I like all of them for different purposes. I really end up using 3 primarily. I will carry around a small staple bound with me on my person at all times pretty much. I use the top staple bounds a lot for like taking notes at my desk and writing quick grocery list items and stuff. I do use the hard covers for like my actual journals and things I want to store for a long time. And then I'll just, right now I'm using a wire-bound Nemesign. You know, I'm kind of tearing through this just as my regular take notes at meetings kind of book. And I'm actually not as far through it as I thought, but I'm this much through it already. So I'm, you know, probably 3/4. So I'll kind of fill that up and then switch to something else. So I've used wire balance before, and they tend to be fairly practical, you know, but I'll probably switch it up to something different after that. But, you know, I would say if price were no object, for me, the hardcover I like the best because you can kind of take everything with you, but I really like being able to tear off sheets like this. So, I don't know, I kind of use a blend. All right, got a troubleshooting question from Laura D on Facebook. I just got my first flex pen, Noodler's Ahab, and I inked it up with Noodler's QOTW. I tested it out on my Leuchtturm hardback dot grid and on my Rhodia pad. When I flexed the nib, it looked great, but then started to feather on both paper types. Is this an ink problem, a paper problem, or maybe am I doing something wrong with the flex pen? Well, Laura, that's a good question. If you've watched the first half of this Q&A already, you probably are going to see somewhat where the answer could be. Noodler's QOTW is one of those fast-drying inks that I talked about earlier, and fast-drying inks definitely absorb more into the paper than regular inks. That's how they're designed. That's how they become fast dry, is they absorb quickly into the paper so that when you then drag your hand over across it, especially for lefties, that's really who this ink is made for, you're not smearing the ink across the page. So you have kind of like a 1-2 punch here of the ink itself is really made to absorb quickly and aggressively into the paper, which is always going to result in more bleed through and more feathering, but you also are using it in a super wet pen. So not only is the Ahab a flex pen, which puts down more ink anyway when you flex it out, but the Ahab itself is just formulated to be an incredibly wet pen. So you're putting down a ton of super wet ink. And you're using it on some decent paper. Like, it's not like you're using it on, you know, newsprint or, you know, something like that, some, you know, equivalent of paper towel or toilet paper. You're using it on some decent paper. It's not the absolute best. Like, if you wanted to really have paper that's pretty impervious, you can get better than Leuchtturm or Rhodia. It's not easy, but, you know, Tomoe River is very ink resistant. The Clairefontaine, especially the Clairefontaine Triumph stationery, is very ink resistant, as is, you know, pretty much any like watercolor type paper or some calligraphy paper. That's really made to resist some stuff. That stuff, the format of most of those papers is not always super practical. So in terms of a journal and stuff like that, this is pretty much about as good as you're gonna get. So I'm not gonna blame the paper. I just want to, you know, make you aware that that is a factor, but I think the ink choice is the biggest factor, and then the fact that you're using the flex pen in that is just something you need to be aware of, that you may at times sacrifice some bleeding and feathering if you're putting down a ton of ink. So some inks will definitely be better than others. QOTW is like one of the ones that I would recommend the least in using in a flex pen if you're trying to resist feathering. You know, using more conventional inks will definitely work better for you. So that's where I would kind of land with those. As far as, you know, which inks will be the absolute best, you're gonna have to probably play with those a little bit and use some different samples. And basically, if you have any other ink, try using that first and see how it does and see if you like it. And if so, you can play around maybe with some more conventional non-fast drying inks and you'll be in pretty good shape. Pretty much if it's fast drying or if it has like a lot of permanent components to it, a lot of those tend to absorb a little more into the paper. You know, like the Noodler's Warden series, like the Bad Belted Kingfisher, Bad Black Moccasin, all those, they tend to absorb more into the paper. Any lubricated ink is going to absorb more into the paper. So like any of the Noodler's Eel series, you know, those like the Aurora inks are pretty wet. Some of the Pilot Oroshizuku, some of those do pretty well. Some of those might be a little too wet. You just have to kind of play around and see what's going to work most to your liking. But that's pretty much what's going on there. All right, got a few more questions here. Oh my gosh. Okay, I am just rolling along today. Got a couple, actually, these are all business questions. Close it out here. So I'll try to move these along. So this is Chintan Pandya on Instagram. A hypothetical business question: with the 3D printer technology catching up, do you think GouletPens can look into manufacturing pen accessories in the future, such as pen stands, hard pen cases, and other cool stuff in-house at a lower cost? The printers with the cartridges, as far as I know, are relatively inexpensive and can make just about anything as long as it isn't too complex. I understand you're a retailer, but these will just be accessories and not too much of a hassle, right? Well, okay, fair enough. Like, we do make some accessories here, pen flush, brass sheets, things like this. You know, it's light manufacturing, if you can even call it manufacturing. So we do some accessories here, and that's fine. It's definitely a different ball of wax, I can say, from the normal stuff that we're doing here, you know, customer service, media, fulfillment, all that kind of stuff. The production manufacturing aspect of things is a whole other thing to manage for us. So it's a little bit of a divergence. You know, we do well for the things that we have and that we sell and all that, but when you get into like, hey, let's make this whole new product, there's a lot of R&D time that goes into it, especially when you're talking about learning equipment like 3D printers and stuff. I know the barrier to entry is not like massive, but it's definitely there. There's something there. Typically that kind of stuff takes a long time to kind of develop. Unless we have somebody in-house that has that expertise of using a 3D printer already, which I don't believe that there is anyone here that does. I'd have to ask a little more specifically, but I don't believe anyone does. I don't have that expertise, so we'd have to develop that expertise, get the printer and all that kind of stuff. So there's a bit of an investment, a bit of a hurdle to get into that. And even then, the kind of the products that you're mentioning, like pen stands and hard, I don't know that I've ever had anyone ask me for a hard pen case. But pen stands, I really don't get asked much for them. So, you know, if it was something I was getting knocked down on my door every single day, why aren't you carrying this? Why aren't you carrying this? People would send me pictures, I would see ideas and stuff like that. It would be much more obvious, oh, let me get a 3D printer, because that would be a way that I could easily do that. At this stage, it's really more of a, oh, 3D printing technology is cool and fun. Let me see what I could possibly make with that technology. I feel like that's kind of where it is the technology is kind of driving the innovation as opposed to the other way around. Or maybe the technology is driving the supply and it's not demand for these objects that's driving the technology of the 3D printer. Does that make sense? So I experienced this a little bit with my parents actually bought a laser engraver. This would have been 8 years ago. No, more than that, 10 years ago. Oh my gosh, it's been that long. 10 years ago, they bought a laser engraver because the technology had come down. It was economical, sort of, for them to buy a laser engraver. My parents were in the desktop publishing business for years, and so my dad, it was just kind of a dream of his to use some like that desktop publishing knowledge to, you know, cut stuff with a laser. Like, that's kind of sweet. And he got intrigued with that technology, kind of bought it on a whim. And then I started making pens, and we started engraving pens with a laser engraver. Worked great. Thank you, Dad. You know, that was like a great merging of technologies for that time. We don't do personalized engraving anymore, but you know, what happened was the technology was cool, and then he tried for like 5 years to find products. They did, you know, personalized engraving, you name it. I mean, there's a company called Laser Bits that sends catalogs of, for lack of a better term, tchotchkes that are made for laser engraving. You know, they even have some like cheap wooden pens and stuff like that. And it's just all kinds of acrylic plaques and all kinds of things that you can then engrave with a laser and sell as part of your business. So it's like the people that developed the laser engraving equipment came up with like catalogs of products that people who bought the laser engravers could have, so that they could then kind of have a business model to justify their laser engravers. So I witnessed that happen, and I was like, that's a bit forced. That's the technology that's kind of like, I guess, opening some doors in some ways, but it was like, it was almost too accessible. And I think that 3D printing technology is still kind of like finding its place. I know they're doing some amazing things with 3D printers and stuff in like the medical field, and you can get 3D printed houses and stuff like that. The technology will get there and find its place, but I think right now it's kind of like, oh, this technology is here. I don't really know what to do with it, but let's go just get one and try some stuff. And that's cool, but that's very much like an experimental phase kind of thing. And I'm not quite in that, at that place where I have that kind of time or have that kind of interest to take something that speculative and see, like, let me just learn this thing and then maybe I'll find out what product to make with it. More power to you if that's what you want to do, and maybe if you're looking to come up with some cool stuff, come and talk to me. No, I think most of that is what's intriguing about the 3D printing stuff is more about the rapid prototyping capabilities of it, not necessarily like I want to do a mass manufacturing on a mass scale. Let me buy 3D printers and just have them run all day long. I don't think that's really what they're made for, at least from my understanding. That's not, especially the smaller ones, I don't think that's what they're made for. I think it's more, hey, I need to prototype this thing, but I don't want to have some factory, you know, overseas or whatever, have to prototype this thing and send it back and forth and have it take forever. I need to prototype this thing. Oh, yeah, this isn't going to work like I thought. Let me change the prototype and print it again. That's the advantage of it. It's not so much, oh, I've got this thing that's well formed. Let me just crank them out. I don't think, at least without having a great knowledge and understanding of that technology, I don't think that's probably where the opportunity would lie with those things. It would be more, hey, I've got connections with a factory that can mass produce things. I need to send them a prototype of what it is I'm dreaming up in my head. Let me 3D print the pen that I'm envisioning and then send it to them, and then they can replicate it and produce it on a mass scale. That's probably more where that technology is beneficial. But I'd be curious to know if you out there know anything about 3D printers and stuff. Post in the comments. I'm very curious to hear. All right, this question is from eleanor.justice on Instagram. You've spoken in the past about collaborating with Noodlers on special ink colors and have done some fun things in conjunction with Boho Berry. I'd love to hear more about your collaboration process or how you select projects to collaborate on and what in that general subject area. I actually just had some of this today. I'll go through periods where I'm actually meeting with 2 different manufacturer reps on Wednesday next week. So, you know, some of this is, well, okay, so let me start off and just say, you know, we've done collaborations with Noodlers, with Edison, Conklin, Monteverde, from like a product side of things, and some others as well, as far as exclusives and, you know, things like that. Pretty much when you're talking about collaborating, it's all relationship building, right? So talking to a manufacturer, a distributor, a blogger, something like that, it's all about, hey, this is what I'm doing. What are you doing? Can we do something together? Would that make sense? Would there be a benefit to us doing that up together as opposed to staying apart? If there is an obvious opportunity to do something together that could increase both of your goals, get you further towards whatever your goals are, then a collaboration makes a whole lot of sense. How do you know where those opportunities are? Who the heck knows? You got to talk to people. So it's all relationship building. You got to be clear about who you are, what it is you do, what are your strengths, where are you trying to go, what are some of your goals, blah, blah, blah. You got to be clear on all that stuff. And then you got to link up with other cool people who are similarly self-aware about what it is they're trying to do and, you know, have some kind of goals and opportunities and resources to be able to do something, ideally, that you could not accomplish purely on your own. So using Noodlers as an example. Noodlers is an ink manufacturer that I could never hope to become. They have a specialty with ink. Nathan Tardif is an ink mad scientist, a genius, so he can develop inks way better than I possibly ever could in-house. So I can collaborate with him with, you know, our combined brain power as far as, you know, Liberty's Elysium as an example. I basically told him, hey, I really want a permanent blue ink. I love blue. I want something to match our logo. You know, we live down the street from Patrick Henry. I would love a Liberty or Death kind of, you know, thing. Patrick Henry themed ink. And he ended up combining it to Liberty's Elysium, taking that Liberty theme with Patrick Henry and combined it with Nathan Hale. And, you know, and so it's like, we were able to do something on that ink that we wouldn't have been able to do separately, you know, and that ink is big on one of our most popular inks that we sell. So that was really cool. So neat collaboration there. It worked with both of our goals, strong alignments, worked out great. Not related to a specific product, but something you said, Boho Berry. So that's Kara Benz. She's great. She is more of I'll call a marketing influencer. So not so much a product manufacturing side. So she's an influencer. So she has built up a huge audience by adding value to people's lives through the stuff that she's posting. You know, she uses products to do the bullet journaling and stuff that she does. A lot of those products are products we sell. So by having her talk and share about her process using our products and then saying you can buy these products at Goulet, she is channeling a lot of people who maybe would not have been exposed to fountain pens and other things that we sell in her tribe, as she calls it. she is able to send people our way that we wouldn't have gotten otherwise. She is able to get exposure from us. We can, you know, send her products. We can send her stuff to give away to her tribe so she can further add value. So there's a good, you know, kind of joining relationship that can happen there. So it's all comes down to what is it that you're trying to do. And does it make sense for both of you to be involved? So, you know, there's certainly a lot of opportunities like that can come about. There's times where, you know, I'll talk to somebody and the timing is just not right, and it's, you know, 2-3 years down the road, and then an opportunity comes about and it's like, oh, okay, you remember we were talking about this, possibly doing this thing someday? Well, here's this opportunity where we could actually do that. So I'm constantly, like, as, you know, an owner and as somebody who's just super interested in all this stuff, I'm constantly, whenever I'm talking to any of our manufacturers, other bloggers, that kind of stuff, I'm always kind of putting the feelers out as far as, like, what is it that you're interested in, or what is it that, you know, we think we could do together someday? You know, is it practical? You know, a good example would be of something that took a while to marinate was Karis Customs. So originally, when Karis Customs was first putting out their Kickstarter, you know, they'd made a few cell phone cases and stuff, and they made a ballpoint pen, but they never made a fountain pen. So when they did their first Kickstarter, they said, hey, we don't really know much about fountain pens. Can we link to your, you know, reviews and link to your store to point people there for ink and stuff like that? You know, we want to sell our pens, but we want to point to you because you're a good resource. And I said, that's great. I appreciate you asking. Sure, by all means. And then I said, hey, by the way, if you guys have a successful Kickstarter and you ever want to sell your stuff through another retailer, let me know. And they were like, okay, cool. Literally, it was like 2.5 years later before they were at the point where they built it up and they were like, okay, we actually do want to go through retailers. Boom, that groundwork had already been laid. We'd already added value to them without ever, I mean, I guess, you know, people from Karis Customs saw our stuff, so it was good exposure for us at the time anyway, to have them point to us as a resource. But probably more likely it was beneficial for them to have, you know, most of their crowd who was not a fountain pen using crowd to then have a resource of fountain pen knowledge. So that ended up working out, you know, really nicely at that time. But we didn't like see any direct like business relationship interaction from that for another 2.5 years until they were ready to start retailing their stuff. And then it was like, okay, we can actually sell your pens now. So that's kind of cool. So, and that's worked out pretty well. So things like that will happen. Sometimes they take a long time to marinate, but a lot of it just comes down to, you know, talking to people and just seeing maybe what the opportunities are. You know, I'm kind of entrepreneurial spirit, obviously, as you can tell. And so I'm constantly kind of trying to talk to people and just seeing like, hey, what is it you're doing? Where are you at? And just asking a ton of questions and then thinking about like, I wonder if maybe someday we could yada, 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 you know? And so whenever I'm meeting with somebody, I'm always thinking like, you know what? Somebody else had asked about this too. I wonder if the three of us together could do something, you know, and kind of keeping it loose like that. So there you go. So that's kind of the process. And that's not just for me, but it could be other people on our team or have ideas and like, hey, you know what? Blah, blah, blah. You know, like the Goulet notebooks, for example, that was not my idea. You know, obviously we had notebooks and stuff like that, but we had an opportunity from, you know, the manufacturing company that makes our notebooks. And, you know, they had reached out, and I think that Rachel was the one that kind of led point on that. The initial, I don't know who had the initial contact, but, you know, she definitely led point on helping to develop those notebooks. So, you know, there's just things that come about that you never know where the opportunity is going to come from. We definitely get hit up a lot with all kinds of opportunities, and so my ears are always open, but at the same time, I'm like, yeah, I don't know if this is really going to work. So it's constantly having to kind of like be back and forth and be aware of what's going on and all that. And then, you know, as with any relationship or any collaboration, it's got to be built on trust, honesty, integrity, all that stuff, gratitude. That all goes such a long way in making sure that I'm really big into making sure that everything is a win-win. So I'm never like trying to collaborate with somebody and trying to squeeze the most out of it as I can. If anything, I'll probably try to do the opposite and be like, well, okay, you know, I want to make sure that I am in the relationship, that I am adding a ton of value. That way, they will want to collaborate with me as I've done as many projects as possible. That's kind of more my mentality of it. So might not get quite as much out of it on the onset, but then, you know, down the road, I'll have more opportunities that will come out of it. That's kind of how I operate. And then last question for this week, this is from molindela on Instagram. Wow, I just had a hard time with that one. I love your store, but since I live in Europe, I'll buy stuff locally too. Do you have any thoughts on leaving product reviews if it's stuff you carry but bought elsewhere? So that's a really good question. First off, I just want to say that's so cool that you would even care enough to ask the question about that. Like, I'm continually amazed at the engagement we have with the fountain pen community here. And like, we get letters every day. Like, I can't tell you how many NaCoWriMo letters I've gotten this month already. It's kind of overwhelming. But just the feedback that we get here on such a regular basis, I just have to stop and be like, nobody else, like no other retailer is getting like personal handwritten letters thanking them for it. Like, literally, like, we get customers that thank us like very specifically for each thing that we do in each area of our business, to the point where we can stand up in a company meeting, because we have company meetings on a weekly basis here, and we can read that letter from the customer, and every single team within our company is just like lighting up because they're being recognized exactly for what they're doing. Like, it's just incredible. Like, I mean, so anyway, bit of a tangent, but I'm just gonna leave me on a really good note here on the Q&A this week. But like, the fact that you would even have the consideration to ask me this question just blows my mind. Like, I couldn't even buy it from you, but I still want to leave you a product review. Is that cool? Like, that's such a, I don't know, that's another way of like it being so indicative that the fountain pen community is just so cool. So, you know, first off, thank you for your support. I appreciate you buying from me at all. And, you know, it's like, you can watch these videos, you can do all this stuff and never buy from me, and that's cool. Like, I know it's not gonna be practical for everybody to do that. I try to make it so absolutely compelling that I add value to you and that my company is the best place for you to get your supplies, that it's just obvious that you don't have to go out of your way to buy from us. But I understand, especially overseas with customs and shipping times and stuff like that, that there's more of a barrier there, and that's totally fine. So, you know, definitely things like leaving product reviews and stuff is one way that you can help. Leaving comments, asking questions, engaging, sharing, spreading goodwill, all that is stuff that you can help us even if you're not buying directly. So if you're like watching this video and you find incredibly valuable and you still want to support our company, but you can't give us any money, talk about us, share this video with somebody, post it on Twitter, whatever you do, sharing it helps a ton. So anyway, so that's one thing, but leaving a product review is really helpful because, you know, personally, when I go shopping online, I find product reviews very valuable. I know you all do too, and we pay a lot of money for a really robust product review system on our site. It's hosted by a company called Bazaar Voice. That's not a secret or anything, but it's an enterprise level, you know, product review system, and it's very robust. Like, we have personalized product review development for each type of product we have. So if you go to review a pen, you can talk about its flow and about its nib smoothness and stuff like that. You can rate that as a reviewer. And then we're talking about ink, you can talk about dry time, and you can talk about, you know, so it's like we've catered each product type to be specific in that review, so you can leave really robust, really meaningful reviews. So we really appreciate when people leave reviews. It takes a little more time to leave it that personalized, but it's really, really helpful. So that said, you know, we use an enterprise level service, and part of that service is having some moderators that will review that content, because believe it or not, there are people on the internet who will post negative things just to get attention. I know it's shocking that that happens on the internet, but product reviews are a place where people will post all kinds of crazy things. And sometimes it's stuff that just looks kind of weird, but it's actually legit, you know, legit pen terminology that just sounds like it might be spammy, but it's really not. And sometimes it really is spam and it needs to be taken off. So there's human beings that actually moderate that system through our stuff, and we can self-moderate it as well. But it all gets reviewed by humans before it actually gets posted onto our site. That's part of where the review, cost comes from, and that's part of where the review lag comes from. If you ever leave a review on our site, there's a bit of a lag there, and that's part of why. And sometimes stuff will get rejected. There's a number of reasons why a review could get rejected. We try not to have anything rejected, you know, that is actually like legitimate. Sometimes we might miss some stuff, and that might happen, but. Stuff could get rejected if it's like, directly linking to a competitor site of ours. Like sometimes, I mean, this happens kind of often, but if somebody's like, oh, leaves a 1-star review and it's like, you can buy this cheaper on Amazon. Okay, really, is that really helpful? You know, that's not great. You know, that could be a competitor. You know, you never know. You never want people to be doing that kind of stuff, and that gets kind of fishy because people abuse that kind of stuff. So we try to have it only be like legitimate, actual reviews of the products. So where I'm getting at with all of that is we really appreciate on a fundamental level you leaving robust reviews and stuff on our site. That said, depending on how you're going about it, it may or may not fall into a place where it ends up making sense to do that. Because if you are saying like, oh, well, I bought this at my local store, you can buy it here and you link directly to it, that right there is going to be a flag to Bazaar Voice. And Bazaar Voice, you know, they're an enterprise level system. It's not, they don't just manage our stuff, they manage huge platforms. Like I don't know specifically, but it's like Walmart, Home Depot level stuff. Like they're a massive company. They're like one of the biggest review system companies out there. So they're used to doing this stuff and they're used to dealing with all kinds of crazy spam. So they will typically like reject stuff if it links direct to other stores, or they'll reject stuff if you say, you know, too explicitly like, well, I didn't buy it here, but this thing is garbage and I hate it, you know, because the challenge you run into is if you have a product and you didn't buy it from the store where the site is that you left a review, how do you know really that you're getting the same product? You know, especially if you think about overseas, like if you buy a, you know, Pilot MR in Europe, it's slightly different than it is in the US, you know, and how is a review moderator going to really know that? So that's where it gets into kind of a sticky place. Or say you thought you bought, you know, one type of product and you bought it at another store. We, as the ones who really kind of own that review system, once it's posted, it's on our site, that's our content at that point. If we have no way of verifying that that's actually the product or that's actually the situation, it's especially if it's negative, then there's no way to verify it, and it's probably going to get flagged in our system and we're probably not going to post it. So that said, to sum it all up here, if it's a very negative review and you just go blasting it on every single retailer's site, even if you didn't buy it there, realize that's probably going to get taken down from all those sites, including ours. And if you are specifically like directly linking to other people to like, even with good intentions, just saying like, well, I would have bought it at Goulet, but instead I bought it on Amazon EU or something like that, you know, and you're linking directly to it, that's probably going to get flagged as well because you're directing traffic away and it hurts SEO and does all these various things. So, you know, that we would probably not want to have on our site. But if you say like, look, I really wanted to buy this thing, but I do have the same product, here's been my experience with it, you can post it like that. That's totally cool. Just understand that there's a chance that it could still get taken down. I'm having to speak in very general terms, but there is a gray area there. You're going to have to use your best judgment. I'm super honored that you would even take the time to ask the question about taking the time to leave a review for something that you didn't even buy at our store, but at the same time, just understand that there's that possibility that it might not last and it might get taken down. Just without being any more specific about what exactly is being posted, is very subjective as to whether or not that could be a legitimate post on that site. So it definitely falls into kind of a gray area, but if you're willing to kind of put in the time and your heart is really in the right place, I think it could still be valuable content. Does that make sense? All right. Whew, solid Q&A today. A long one. Oh my gosh, I'm going so long on these recently. This is just ridiculous. I gotta find a better way to speed it up. Anyway, too late now. Question of the week this week is, who would you want me to collaborate with if you could? Me being Brian Goulet or me being the Goulet Pen Company. Whether it's like a product design thing or just like an influencer promotion marketing, more of a marketing collaboration kind of thing. You know, dream it up. If you were like, you should totally do a cage match with Hulk Hogan. I don't know where that reference came from. Like, do that. I would love to hear you post, you know, things like that. So if you think, realistic or not, like what collaboration you would like to see me or our company in general do some sort of collaboration, I would love to hear about that. Just kind of see, just get a pulse on it. That'd be kind of neat. Thank you for being here with this extended Q&A. Jenny's going to kill me with all this editing she's gonna have to do. So thank you, Jenny, for all of the amazing editing you've done for this Q&A. And thank her in the comments too. She needs some love. Thank you all very much. I appreciate it. Be sure to subscribe to YouTube. If you haven't already, check all these products out on GouletPens.com. I hope you have a great weekend and a fantastic rest of your week. Thanks for watching, and Right on.